HiSec Buyback offers 90% JITA anywhere in HiSec. Simply go to hisec.evebuyback.com, appraise your items, create a contract, and get paid quickly.
This is Talking in Stations, a show about EVE Online. I'm your host, Artimus Albosa, all by myself today. I hope you're having a wonderful evening. I certainly am. Today on the show, we're going to be looking through different things. The show's title, at least for the time being, is The Details of Destruction. There's a lot of destruction happening out there in EVE Online right now. Some of it happening on a very large scale, hundreds of billions of ISK dying at once. Some of it at a smaller scale, but trickling in over time and adding up. So we want to walk you through where all the centers of destruction are occurring right now in EVE, and then also talk a little bit about the history of the groups, the general context of the area, and maybe a bit of prediction where we think things could go in the future. Also, we'll talk about some stuff going on with the game, make sure you're staying up to date on updates that are occurring, various iterations on the skill queue UI that you may have missed, and some other goodies happening from CCP. So first and foremost, I want to pull up and show you guys something really cool. I just remembered that this thing existed. I'll spend 30 seconds on it because I want you to know that it exists too. On Zkill board, there's a Zkill API, which shows like live feed of when kills happen and are also uploaded through people's connected ESI or through people posting manually. And they will just pop up as little blips on the map. And while I was prepping for today's show, I had this up just on a side monitor, and it was very peaceful, even though it was just a rundown of all the distraction or all the destruction happening throughout the universe. So I want to let you guys know this thing exists. If you ever want to get to it, you can head to Zkill, and up at the top there's a map button. And it's just a really cool thing to see. And it occurs to me you guys can't see what I'm looking at. Hang on. Alright, there we go. Apologies. So this is the Zkill map that I was mentioning, and so as kills will pop in, we'll give it a second to refresh and update. You'll see just a red dot appear on the map, and the size of the dot is roughly correlating to the value of the kill. So smaller value kills are smaller, larger value kills are larger. And first of all, it's just cool to see, cool to look at, see all the activity that's happening once it finishes updating. But then also, as I was prepping for today's show, I was just about to hit go live, I noticed a big red blob, and there was a Fortizar. So I just right-clicked, opened the Fortizar, and here's what I got. And it was super interesting to me, and I'd love to talk to you guys about it, because this Fortizar died in 7 QTAC in Great Wildlands, and more importantly, it was killed by Ebola. Now, if you're also a listener to the Declarations of War podcast, you may know that there's currently a bit of a small conflict going on in Great Wildlands area, where Ebola have regained their strength when they were previously evicted from the area. They had literally a civil war within their group. They split off into 2 separate groups who were fighting each other, but they seem to have regained their strength and are fighting again and exerting their influence in this area. And I just got a pleasant reminder of that as this Fortizar died. So I'd love to see the story on what happened, what caused this to die, who are I'm feeling good, why did they place this here? And it's just a fantastic rabbit hole to dive down. But that's not our top story today. What I want to talk to you about today is actually a much larger battle report. And if I pull it up, you may recognize some of the names on this battle report. First of all, the big numbers. Total lost 331 billion ISK. So this is another multi-hundred billion ISK battle happening in Hysteria and Losec. So this is called Dari Losec space, near-ish to Jita, that general area of space. 200 pilots in total, 100 on one side, 100 on the other. And of course, it's Losec, capitals are involved. Who do you expect to be there? Snuffed out. But apart from Snuffed out, we also had friends who we've had on the show before, Hidden Leaf Village Ninja Assassin, yada yada yada. Their name is so long that it gets cut off in the UI of this battle report. Let me make this a bit bigger for you guys. There we go. And what happened the story of this battle, as I'm told, is it was just a casual skirmish happening in low-sec, and it just kept escalating, and everyone was willing to keep bringing out bigger and bigger ships, and eventually, as they do, Hidden Leaf Ninja, etc., 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 decided to drop super capitals, and Snuffed Out dropped more dreads to kill some of them. Now, surprisingly, this was a relatively close fight, 45 to 54% on either side. A lot of that, I believe, has to do with heavy multi-boxing on the Team B side relative to the Team A side. I could be incorrect. Snuffed Out probably also have their own heavy amount of multi-boxing when you're talking about Dread pilots. But as we see, the super capitals here weren't supported by a significant number of facts, or at least not a significant number that died. So they were brought in to gank some capitals and then blitz out. But unfortunately, some of them got caught and died. But that's par for the course. You'll recall from a previous episode, I think it was 2 weeks ago, we had Baltram, who's a member of this group, and he discussed with us sort of their mentality, how they play the game, how they go about it, in the context of, at that time, they had lost 1.8 trillion ISK because they lost 2 pirate faction titans in the same fight. It was another battle. They decided to fly them. It wasn't planned. It was just ad hoc, and they escalated as they wanted to. And that's a pretty cool thing. It's something that doesn't happen very often in EVE. And I guess sometimes lightning strikes twice, although this time it was a less powerful strike, but still nonetheless something interesting to look at. In other news, we have some big kills going on in HiSec. And I wanted to talk about this one because of some of the groups involved. So this was a Sotiyo that died in HiSec. With the Sotiyo, you also have to bear in mind the value of the core. So there are some folks out there, I think the most vocal proponent I have heard is Thanek from WOMP, who will talk about industry in HiSec, and especially once you get into large structures. The value of the core means you are a very appealing target for would-be HiSec war deckers. And that's because it's harder to bat phone and bring in supporters if they're going to have to commit to being in a war deck and being vulnerable at all times in HiSec. Versus if you've got a Citadel that's reinforced in low sec or in null sec, you can just bring in whoever ad hoc. But this one died to Jita Holding Inc., and also Vendetta. And those who've been playing this game for a while, at least for the last 2 or 3 years, may recall that Vendetta is a very prolific HiSec war decking group. So hub campers is one way that people have described them in the past. They've also been known as a mercenary group, so if you wanted to hire them to hit someone else in HiSec, you could do that. They've also been known to, what's a nice way to put this, extort various members of HiSec, so sort of roll up, reinforce their structures, and then say, hey, if you pay us a fee, we won't destroy your structures. A sort of protection racket, if you will. And that, like most groups in EVE, they've waxed and waned in their power in the HiSec, but it appears that they're regaining their strength and are being a relatively decent counterbalance to another group that's well known for that sort of gameplay in HiSec, which is Black Flag. And as I was just preparing for today's show, scrolling through the kill mails, seeing where the destruction was happening, I noticed that it looks like Vendetta probably had a war with Black Flag, and they had their war HQ set to an Astrahaus, but Black Flag decided to come in and kill that. And so what that tells me is that these guys are not particularly happy with each other, and also willing to commit ships to fight each other and make things happen. What I don't know for sure is what's happened in the past when we're talking about war headquarters, is one group will have lots and lots of wars all tied to the same structure. I think Vendetta's done this in the past. But then if that one structure gets killed, all of those wars drop under the mechanics of HiSec war decks. If a war HQ is destroyed, then the war ends, and you can't restart the same war against the same group for 2 weeks. I'm betting they've progressed and learned from mistakes of the past, so they have multiple structures out there which they're using as war HQs. This could also just be a random Astrahaus that Vendetta decided to kill. But that's some interesting things to keep an eye out for, and interesting just details and nuance to these kills that are happening all over the place. Other combat and action that's going around town. We had another Sotiyo that died over in Immensea. And there's been a bit of discussion as to who Black Rose are or where they play into things, but it's worth noting this Sotiyo died in Immensea to Dreadbomb. And if we have a look at our map here, we're in the Eve universe, we're down in the southeastern part of the universe. So this is former Legacy space. And if I can find and click on Immensea, it's right adjacent to Catch, which is where Dreadbomb has recently been expanding out into. And you can see that this is a heavily contested area. There are soft timers all over the map. There's a good chunk of the space that isn't even owned by anyone. But it appears that it's actively being contested by various groups, be it Fire Coalition, the remnants of Legacy Coalition, and also Dreadbomb, who are in there. As I understand it, just for the fights. They don't really care about the space, but I could be incorrect there. So this is an interesting hotbed to keep an eye out for, especially if we're going to have these large fights where supers are fielded and extra large sized citadels are going to be dying. Also, while we're in the area, we should talk about Catch. You may recall we talked about on a previous show a test Keepstar died in Catch, and this is the area that is sort of like the outer limit of where the Imperium is willing to strike to hit former Legacy structures. And they've been pushing that and pushing that and pushing that envelope over time, with discussions about, hitting these structures is where we can see who has Pappy's back or who has Test's back. And that's true to a certain extent. One thing I would note is that any structures in here, if their former owners no longer live in this space, right? So if Brave has structures in this space, they've sold them. And so the structures have value to Brave only in the amount that they can be sold. Same thing for Test, same thing for any other group that used to live in former Legacy space. They have the value that they can sell or unanchor, but it isn't a strategic asset for them. If they lose it, it doesn't hurt their ability to maintain their current space. And so if it gets attacked, they're not going to be willing to risk as much to try to defend it. So the only people who are going there to defend, quote unquote, aren't really defenders. They're there for the content. They're there in the hopes that a fight's going to break out and they can get in on the action, get in on the destruction, and get some nice kills. So I just wanted to bring a little bit of nuance to the conversations that happen around any further citadels, specifically extra large citadels that are dying in this area. They have some value, but it's monetary value on a scale much lower than where these coalitions tend to be at, not strategic value. But this area in general is definitely a good place to keep an eye on for looking forward into the future. We've got a lot of very large, very, very active groups fighting down here. We've got Fire Coalition, which, if you're unfamiliar, they are mostly a group of Russian time zone and Russian players. We've got Army of Mango's Alliance, who are a large portion of the Chinese player base in EVE Online. We've got the Imperium, of course, out here to the southwest. We've got Dreadbomb and the rest of Wrecking Crew, who are in Catch and pushing down, who are in Providence and pushing down into Catch. And then you've got just a bunch of, not neutral, but less strictly aligned third parties who are also in the area. So this, and then add into that Fraternity, who have recently launched a Fortizar, as I understand it, in Stain. So right on the border between Stain and Esoteria and UTAC WLT, Fraternity launched a Fortizar for the purposes of using it as a staging area to strike out at the Army of Mango's Alliance. And if you're unfamiliar with the history behind that, both of the groups have a large Chinese player base, many of whom came from the Serenity server, which used to be the only server available, or even still is, the official Chinese server. And they had lots of history of fighting on that server, and they seem to be bringing that feud over to us here. I think I made some comments previously that this was the biggest blood feud in EVE Online, and I think I stick by that. It is definitely heating up and worth watching for the future. So if you're out there roaming, you're looking for an area of combat where people are going to be active in space, not necessarily just Ishtars or Gilas or whatever in their ratting sites, roam down in this area. You're probably going to find some interesting things happening. Other interesting things happening around space that I absolutely love to see are Rorquals are dying. I didn't want to look at this Rorqual in particular. I wanted to look at all of them. Because in the past, we've run into issues in EVE Online where Rorquals are either extremely safe if you have a large enough umbrella, or completely worthless because they can't be defended, so they're just a giant target that aren't worth using. And it seems like right now we have found a really nice balance, where not only do we have Rorquals being fielded because they're worth flying, it's worth using a Rorqual to mine for that ore, but they're also dying to a variety of fleets. So it's not just you have to have 100 dreads to go and kill a Rorqual, or you have to have 200 Kikimoras to kill a Rorqual. Rorquals are dying to just normal fleets. You've got them dying to nano, you've got them dying to heavy armor, you've got them dying to yes dreads and yes Kikimoras and yes bombers. But all of these different options for attacking them create an environment where multiple different kinds of groups can engage in whaling content. But also, it's still, the reward and the risk of those losses is still at a good enough balance where lots and lots and lots, I'd reckon thousands of pilots are out there in their Rorquals because it's worth it. You can make a good chunk of ISK flying your Rorqual in nullsec right now, especially on moons. So I wanted to talk about that. Mention that they're dying everywhere. You'll see these in lowsec. They weren't actually mining. They're tackle Rorquals, which are always lovely to see. But it seems we found a relatively healthy balance point with the level of income that Rorquals can get, as well as their defensive power. With one caveat that I'll say, which is that most of the Rorquals that die, and I'll just pick a random one here, are ones that are not exactly fit well. So if I just scroll through these kill mails here, that one had a ton of SIBOs in it. This one has a survey scanner in the mid. Let's look at this next one. This one, also another survey scanner. This guy, he's got drone nav computers. There are a bunch of them with drone nav computers just all through the mids. And it shows that a lot of your survivability in Rorquals comes down to, are you flying smart? Are you traveling in your Rorqual, or are you signowing to where you need to be? You're with your fleet, you're in your standing fleet, you're on comms and communicating. But then also, when you get attacked, are you responding appropriately, or are you AFK or freaking out? So every Rorqual pilot should know that when you're out in an ore belt or on a moon, I wouldn't say an ore belt, if you're out in an ore anom or on a moon and you're mining, you should have your Wetu mobile depot. And the reason that folks use Wetu mobile depots is because, number one, you can refit. So you could have drone navs all throughout your mids, and then if something lands on grid with you that's hostile, refit real quick. That way you have your tank, but then you're also maximizing your income when there's no loss. Plus, the volume of specifically the Wetu mobile depot, its cargo capacity is 4,000 M3, which lets you store multiple of your very expensive excavator mining drones. So if I could just give a general PSA to the Rorqual pilots out there who may have found themselves on this feed of Rorqual losses, please have your Wetu out, please dump your Excavs in it, and please refit to a proper tank fit if you get dropped. Alright, that's the end of my PSA to Rorqual pilots. And I think that's most of the stuff that I wanted to discuss regarding destruction that's going on right now. As we exited out of the war, we did a couple of shows where we went around the map, looked at where the various groups were landing, and tried to figure out how well we think they would do, where to keep your eye on for progress, and where to go from there. And things have mostly stayed the same, with the exception that down here in the Southeast, things are really beginning to heat up. We've got lots of big, powerful entities committing heavy assets to attack strategic infrastructure. And so that's definitely a place to keep your eye on for. Plus, it's also a place where the powers are relatively balanced. It's not going to be a one-sided affair, right? Up in fraternity space, up in the northwest, there are a lot of smaller groups. Like if we take a look at Pureblind, if fraternity decides they want to take this space from Banderlogs, they could take the space from Banderlogs. Yes, it would be a slog. Banderlogs would put up a hell of a fight, but fraternity has the power that if they committed to it, they could do it. Whereas if we look down here, if you've got groups like AOM, Fire Coalition, fraternity adding their own like third party to it, you've got Dreadbomb down there, Imperium's over to the southwest, but they aren't quite willing, or at least as of yet don't seem to be willing to extend as far with capitals and super capitals. It creates a very interesting area where the powers all feel like they could win. And if you feel like you could win a fight by escalating, you're going to be willing to escalate that fight, which is how we, as enjoyers of EVE Online and destruction, get to see the really big fights and the really interesting things happen. Alrighty, so in other news, I did want to quickly take a look at the markets. We had a bit of a discussion about Marauders and Marauder prices, as well as other ships in a post-scarcity world, or more specifically, a post-industry changes world. So if we look back at the market history, back before the changes to the way battleships and capitals were built, so that they required PI and reaction materials and such, Marauders were typically around 1.1, 1.2, 1.3 bill. And then of course you can see on this graph here, industry changes are announced and they hit, and everything spikes, goes out the window. And then we just had a very slow but steady return back to normal. There are a few bumps along the way as speculation occurs, but it seems like we're already back down to just a few hundred mil more than the previous prices, which I think is pretty cool. I also think it's interesting to note that with the upcoming changes in Q4, as scarcity ends and as minerals and other items become more available, we're probably going to see a lot of these prices drop even further, which will put us in a very interesting spot. And I'd love to know your all's thoughts on where that's going to leave the state of the game if things become even more cheap than they are now. In game news, we had some updates to the skill queue that I wanted to go through with you guys. Specifically, they're iterating on the skill user interface. So they improve some tooltips and stuff like that. They also improve some graphical bugs that were occurring and going on. And overall, the info that I'm getting from people who are using this and who had complaints about the skill queue in the past is that this is addressing a lot of the highest tier, highest priority complaints that they had. And if I can, I'm going to change and show you guys the new skill. Okay, so here we are in the skill queue. I believe one of the biggest complaints is there was a huge amount of wasted space over here that's now been adjusted. So between your queue itself and the skill catalog or the skill plan browser, there were also issues with as you had your window resized, the numbers and the text and this sort of UI down at the bottom right was bugging out, so to speak. So that's also been adjusted. Some sizes of various texts and spacing between UI elements has been improved. And also, if I can, you can resize the size of the window in a much more forgiving way than you could in the past, which is really cool to see for those who like to dock and resize windows. I don't think you can dock it yet. Unlike the character sheet, which you can dock, you can't quite dock this skill training thing, which is unfortunate. I would personally like CCP Please. That's at the top of my list. Let me dock this thing. But it's nice to see specifically that iteration is happening. I think when the skill queue first came out, there were a lot of players who had some legitimate, some just whiny complaints about the way that the UI worked. And it's great to see this first step from CCP in terms of taking that feedback from the player base, taking that feedback from the CSM, and putting it into action and having iteration. If you still have things which you're not a particular fan of, which hurt or lose your functionality, definitely make sure you're still voicing those concerns, letting CCP or your CSM representative know that they're a problem and that you'd like them to be fixed. But overall, I think it's great to see iteration occurring and occurring quickly. In other CCP news, let me change my windows back here. We have some skins on sale if you're a skins kind of person. These ones look actually really freaking cool. Piece of the Two Swords, Crown and Sword skins return. Looks like they're for a lot of Amar ships, as I understand it. So if you just bought yourself a shiny new Paladin at their recently reduced price, don't tell me the Paladin isn't here. Does the Paladin not get these skins? Oh no. Okay, well if you're an Avatar pilot, then you can get this freaking awesome skin right here. It's absolutely beautiful. And they're also on sale. So that's something interesting to keep an eye out for if you use them. We've talked about it on the show in the past, that when skins come on sale, especially for limited times, even if you're not a person who's going to throw real-life money at the game to purchase the skins, you can also throw your ISK at Plex, take that Plex into the New Eden store, and purchase skins that way. And depending on the skin, depending on the limited time offer and how much people are liking it, it might be a really good speculative investment. If these skins go off the market, there's no more supply going to be around, and anybody who wants them is going to have to buy them from people who bought a surplus when they were first announced. So if you are the kind of person with a little bit of ISK to spare, and you think that this is the kind of skin players will want in the future, might be worth investing. Especially, it seems like these skins have been in the game before and have returned. So I bet you if we went to our market, we could find what they were and their prices, and where they are now. Let's get to capitals. Let's go to Titans. Standard Titans for the Avatar. Crown and Sword skin. Yeah, so at the moment they're 3.2, 4 bill on the market for just sell orders, no buy orders. And you can see how it's varied over time. With high value items like this, there's not much data on the market because they don't sell very quickly. So let's find a better example. What's another popular ship? The Revelation. So that's a capital size ship. People want to bling those things out. They've also got, or they're flown rather frequently. So let's go check out our dreadnoughts for the Amar. And we want Revelation's Crown and Sword. Another multi-billion ISK. Also not that many data points. So these might be, what we may be discovering here, is that these skins in particular just don't have that much interest in them. The market is mostly driven by speculation versus people actually purchasing the skins. It's entirely possible. Alright, so always check the markets first. Don't just listen to what you hear on the internet. This is sort of what I expected to see more. As you see all these bumps as the skins are speculated on, so they're bought up and they're sold, or if they come back into the New Eden store market or leave, always worth keeping an eye out for if you can make money off of that. Maybe not the Crown and Sword ones, might just be worth buying for yourself if you're interested in flying one of these ships that looks like this. But who knows? Risk your money at your own, or use your own money at your own risk. Speaking of market trading, someone you can probably listen to who has a lot more info and useful advice than myself is the Eve Academy team. They recently released a video all about trading for profit. This is another in their fantastic Eve Academy series. Did they partner with an Eve partner on this one, or is this just the regular crew? I'm not seeing them name drop anyone, so I think this is just the regular crew of people putting together an informative series. So if you're a new player, and the idea of trading on the markets for profit sounds interesting to you, definitely take a look at this as an introductory level information on how that gameplay works and how you can interact with it. The Eve Academy stuff is all just phenomenal. All right. So that's most of what I had to talk about today. Let me just quickly scroll back through the chat. I wasn't watching it as diligently as I should have, so I want to see if there's anything that I should miss. No partner. It's about market and the market UI, not investment strategies. Okay. Well, there you go. If you are looking for investment strategies, there are plenty of Eve partners who are giving out that information. We were chatting before the show. Oz Eve is a great one. I have historically watched the market report by DeLone Wolf. He does one every Sunday, I think. Post those to YouTube. There are also plenty of other folks who just names aren't at the top of my head at the moment, who have great info on markets and how to trade. It's an interesting thing when you're looking for information about, are people telling you to go buy this thing, and therefore they could be manipulating the markets themselves? Or are they telling you this is how you evaluate items that are worth buying, so that then you can take those skills, take those tools, those methods of analysis, and apply them in your own way? As an example, I think Cade Plays Games, who we had on previously to talk about his new player introductions and things. He recently released a video talking about that process, talking about how do you evaluate, is this item worth speculating on? Is this item worth investing to trade on a margin? Is this item, how do you interact with it from in terms of you've produced it and now you want to go sell it to the market? So all very interesting things. It's fantastic that we have such a great community of experts who are willing to share their knowledge and expertise. Alrighty, just scrolling back through. I don't believe I've missed anything. We've got some people who remember Ebola, talking about them. Man, Ebola, I want to talk about this for a minute. Let me find them. I had their for it as our kill mail. Ebola is a fantastic example of a group that's relatively common in Eve. And you're willing to feel free to disagree on me with this. But there are lots of groups who they do cool stuff, but they're also really freaking toxic. And maybe it's just because I fought against Ebola, and so they were toxic to my group, because obviously we're their enemies, and you're not going to be nice to your enemies, depending on the circumstances. But they just sort of typify this bad guy vibe. And Lowsec Snuffed Out is like the classic example of that. They want to be the bad guys. Ebola want to be the bad guys. And HiSec, I think Black Flag want to be the bad guys. And it's just this really cool thing that I enjoy, that out there in the EVE Online universe, there are people who want to be the bad guys and who can go about doing that. Like, they can be the bad guys in the same way people are going around saying they're the good guys, right? So you've got Vendetta, who go around and they have this different way of marketing themselves, where they're like, hey, we're mercenaries, you can hire us, we can protect your structures. And yet they're still just going around killing structures in HiSec just like Black Flag does. Obviously there's some nuance there. I'm generalizing, so don't take this as gospel. But it's just always an interesting thing for me personally to look at, where you have these groups who want to be known as the bad guys. I think Dreadbomb are starting to shape up as the kind of group who wants to be the anti-hero down in the south. You've got Nullsechnia, Sherlopen, who I think did a similar thing when the groups were leaving NC Dot. They very much had this vibe of, we don't want to be a part of your establishment. We're not happy about the way leadership is taking this, so we're going to go do our own thing, and we're going to bite you in the butt for it. And it's just a really cool way that not only is this happening and it's creating interesting stories, but EVE Online, the mechanics that are there, the community that's there, the grudges that form over time, enable this sort of thing to happen over and over and over again and continue to result in truly amazing things. If you've been a part of any of the battles between NC or Wrecking Crew and Alsechnia, if you're down even in the smaller scale stuff out in Great Wildlands between Ebola and the folks that they're fighting, like it's just an amazing thing to be a part of. And part of that's the game mechanics, but also EVE's known to have some pretty boring game mechanics over time. The reason that we engage with them is because of these stories. It's because of the grudges. It's because of you want to go blow up that person's spaceship because they were mean to you. Or maybe you want to be known as the mean guy, so you're blowing up people's spaceships to make them angry. Alright, I think that'll do it for this episode of Talking in Stations. I'm gonna cut it there before I go and make some people angry at me because I overgeneralize too much. Although I can always issue an apology later. Hope you enjoyed. We'll see you again tomorrow. I think we're going to have another installment of our industry series, which, by the way, if you're watching on YouTube, we've collected all the videos we've done on the YouTube or on the industry gameplay and put them into a playlist so that it's all easy for you to identify step by step. We've got mining, we've got reactions, we've got a whole slew of stuff that I don't remember off the top of my head that you can go and take a look at. And also, just as a quick plug, because I'm the only one here and so it doesn't feel as awkward, if you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. 43% of people who watch our videos aren't subscribed at all. So if you want to help the algorithms recognize that it's content you want to see in the future, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Definitely worth your time. And it's free, it doesn't hurt you at all. Alrighty, that'll do it for today's episode of Talking in Stations. See you tomorrow.